I'll call this meeting to order at 6 p.m. This is a regular meeting for Tuesday, March 2nd, 2021. Madam Clerk is ready to call the roll, please.
Tim Hale.
Here.
Stephanie Nowers.
Here.
George McKee. Robert Yunt, are you on the line?
Here.
Moki 2.
Here.
Jesse Sumner. Tam Bovee.
Here.
Mr. Mayor, you've got a quorum.
Let's take a look at the agenda. Anything you want to pull from the consent agenda? Anything from the consent agenda? Mr. Sumner?
Sorry. I wanted to pull resolution 21-016.
21016. Okay. Anybody else?
I'd like to pull IM 21019.
019
AM, I'm sorry.
AM. Okay. 21016 and 21019 are pulled. Anything else? Any other changes to the agenda? Hearing none, the agenda is approved as changed with 21016 and 21019 pulled from the consent agenda. Pledge of Allegiance. Mr. Smolden, we'll call on you, please.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, sir. Are there any changes to the minutes? Hearing none, the minutes are approved as presented. City reports. Madam Mayor from Wasilla.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The city of Wasilla is now taking applications for CARES Act Phase 5 PPE for businesses and nonprofits inside the city of Wasilla. And if you're interested in the hockey events happening at the Menard Sports Center, you can watch live or you can watch on demand by using LiveBarn. Just visit livebarn.com. And we are excited to welcome back the Why Not Try Triathlon. Registration is open, and there's very limited spots this year because of the mitigation plan. So go to whynottryWasilla.net, and that's try with an I. Okay, anybody have any questions?
Okay, thank you, Mayor. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
I don't see anybody from Palmer or Houston. So I guess we'll go to Mr. Smolden.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the Assembly and staff. It's nice to be here. I just wanted to give you a quick report on the governor. I've spoken to him almost every day over the last 7 days, which what that means to me is that he is going stir crazy because he usually never calls me that often. So, but he is recovering well, and every day that I've talked to him, he's doing better and better. So I think he has a couple more days of kind of mandatory quarantine, but he's been working from home, and in fact, he's never really stopped working even when we wanted him to. So that's good news. I don't know how much you've been paying attention to what's happening in Juneau. It's good to have both bodies organized now. The governor would like to see some more of his proposed legislation, constitutional amendments move a little faster. There's been quite a bit of talk in the House about revenues, but I think it's important, at least from the governor's perspective, that we look at both spending and revenues, and there's been some talk about whether or not the governor would look at some broad-based revenues, and his comment on that has always been that he would like to see a discussion on spending in conjunction with revenues, and that he is not interested in signing any revenues bills without some guardrails in place. Spending cap, the constitutional amendment that gives Alaskans the ability to weigh in on taxes, and also a fix to the PFD. And so we're really hoping that the legislature will move those constitutional amendments, get those on the floor for a vote, so that we can have some permanent solutions to this fiscal situation that we have in Alaska. You know, the legislature as a body, this is just not critical of individuals, but as a body, over the last 5-6 years, the legislature as a body has proven that if there is revenue, it will continue to be spent, and there are no guardrails right now on that spending. So that's the reason for the constitutional amendments. He hopes that that those will keep moving through the legislature. The other thing that I wanted to report on tonight is that we have some really good news for tourism. And I know that people have been very concerned about that, but there's been some recent announcements about planning on the airlines part. And at this time, they are planning for an additional about 800,000 seats. So what that means is they have prepared for an additional 800,000 people potentially to fly up to Alaska this summer. And there's some reasons for that. If you think about it, you know, a lot of the European countries, international travel, those things that people in the lower 48 might do on a normal summer or vacation season, a lot of those places are still probably going to be closed or access is going to be restricted. So our message is that Alaska is open. We can travel safely. We can participate in the glory that Alaska has to offer safely. And so we're encouraging a robust tourism industry, and it looks pretty promising. We do have the Canada problem with the borders still being very restricted, and also with the cruise ships. But the administration continues to work on that along with the federal delegation. I know that today the governor, I believe the governor and other members of the staff met with the general consul of Canada to discuss possible access for cruise ships. So I think that's about all I have for tonight, but if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Questions for Mr. Smolden? I think you're good.
All right, I'm going to listen on the way home, so
Okay,
thank you.
another good-
Thank you again. Have a good
Is there
night.
enough snow in Willow for you, or?
I'm going home to plow.
You're good. Well, when you're done with your place, you head over to mine. Okay, any other public relations reports from some members? Anything new going on? How about Mr. Brown, you taking up the next report?
All righty. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to give the Assembly and the public a quick update on Houston Middle School. In addition to the letter that was provided to the school district on February 8th regarding the Houston Middle School FEMA determination delay, we provided an update to the superintendent on Monday, March 1st. That letter's been provided to the Assembly. Just wanted to kind of discuss that in general on the record tonight. The FEMA claim is moving forward. However, FEMA has not given us a timeline for when it will make its determination. Our current funding, available funding, remains at $23.5 million for construction of the new school. The expected construction cost estimate is approximately $34 million. So we've got about a $10 million gap right now that's unfunded. We continue to actively negotiate an additional insurance settlement that should reduce this amount further. And until we have that FEMA determination, the borough will not have sufficient funding to issue a construction bid or award a construction contract. As it seems unlikely, we will not have a FEMA determination this month. We notified the school district that if bidding does not begin in March, it is very likely that the construction of the new school will be delayed by 6 to 12 months from the original completion date of August of 2022. The borough is budgeting to cover the remaining balance of school bond debt reimbursement due this year, which is about $8.5 million, which was not included in the governor's proposed budget for this upcoming fiscal year. I requested that the school district notify us as soon as possible if they were willing to cover the construction funding gap so we can continue with bidding and award pending the FEMA determination. So just wanted to make sure that was read into the record and that that's understood. That's where we are. We are hitting a point where if we don't get out to bid in March, it's very likely that we won't get construction started in a timely way that it could be delivered in August of next year. On the second topic, I'm going to invite Mr. Dolan, our Public Works Director, to come forward. During our last Assembly special meeting in strategic planning, we talked a lot about road bonds. So Mr. Dolan's going to give you an update on the 2018 road bond package, what projects we've been able to or are close to receiving a 50% match on, and then kind of talk about what work remains. So the Assembly has an update on those specific projects and where we are.
Terry Dolan, Director of Public Works. So in your packet tonight, you should have the slide as depicted on the screen there. In 2018, the voters approved a 50% bond of 10 collector roads around the borough. We thought at the time there was a potential for the state to fund the other 50%. The state had not done that and hasn't done it yet, but notified us that these projects competed well for community transportation funds, and the state intends to fund the other half of at least the top four there. You see on your list there, Selden, Hemmer, Herman, and Trunk. And so those bond projects likely will be completed. We're actually in negotiations right now over maintenance on these, and there's really only one minor snag in that we're working through right now. So I expect that to be completed soon. I depicted on here the pedestrian projects, which are these safe route to school projects as yellow. And the reason why is we believe that the size and scope of some of them is fundable by the road service areas. And so we'll be discussing that with the RSAs in the coming months for some of those projects. Some of them, the costs are very large and it's not reasonable for the RSAs to fund those. So only some of those will likely be completed. The rest of these we're leaving on the list for right now because we think there's a possibility there could be federal stimulus in the near future that could fund these. And later this summer, and I'll defer to the borough clerk, but later this summer, I think the Assembly will have an opportunity to make a choice as to whether or not to put full funding of these back on the ballot this fall.
Question, you ready for questions? Questions for Mr. Dolan, Mr. Sumner?
Yeah, so I'm familiar with all these projects except for, I guess I don't know what the Cherry Lake Drive corridor is supposed to do.
So it's depicted on the map. If you have this map in your packet, it's way over on the west side, coming out of the city of Houston. City of Houston did a lot of work on the portion of it that is already is within the city limits, and in theory, it's the connector over to Selden. So eventually, you connect those two together, and you have a route all the way across the northern part of the borough, all the way to Houston.
Which, you said there may be one or two projects you're taking off, the trail ones. Which ones are those?
So we're not taking any of them off.
The pedestrian projects.
Right, the pedestrian pathways are all associated with schools.
Mm-hmm.
And we haven't actually negotiated with the road service area boards the details of which ones they think they can pay for and which ones they can't. But as always with the road service areas, they're very well funded in the core area because you have dense development and high assessed values. So even a small mill rate produces a lot of revenue in the core area. But out in the periphery of the borough, in the more remote areas, it's unlikely that you'll see those road service areas be able to support any of these projects. So that's only a partial answer, but I can't give you any more detail than that.
More questions for Mr. Dolan? Mr. Brown, I guess.
Yeah, so as Mr. Dolan alluded to, we'll be continuing to look for funding opportunities for these. For the ones that we think we can secure through the community transportation program, those would probably come off the list. But what we may do when that decision point comes is potentially bring legislation to allow the Assembly to consider putting it back out on the ballot for without a 50% match, which would allow us to move on with all of these projects. We'll see what funding opportunities for that 50% match that might occur before that happens. So that's kind of where we are, and just wanted to give you an update on where we were standing with regards to that. So staff are continuing to pursue that. And then I'm going to invite Ms. Heindel and Ms. Joy Mariner forward from BDO. Tonight, they're going to give you a quick overview of the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, our CAFR. Answer any questions that you have around that this evening. So with that said, I'll turn it over to them for the presentation.
Hand it right on over. I'm going to scoot this over a little bit so I can put my paperwork down. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for having me here, and to all of you for being here tonight. Normally, this is already very large and some of it confusing for people. It's probably even harder when your auditor's wearing a mask. I'm going to do my best to communicate the information I think is important for you to hear as it relates to the audit of the financial statements. And as everyone is aware, this has been a very unusual year for the borough, and an unusual year from an audit perspective too, because normally we come kind of camp out in your accounting department for a few weeks and we get the audit work done. And we did come out here in person for some of the time. We had a kind of split audit, remote versus in person, trying to limit the amount of time and on site. But you should have two documents with you. One is the audit wrap-up, and that's the conclusion of the audit, the required communications to you as the assembly. And the other is the comprehensive annual financial report. Now, I do not plan to go through every page of this 220-page document. Don't worry, but I do want to cover a couple of highlights and key items that I'd like to focus on, and also talk about how you can expect these financial statements to adjust even going into 2021, specifically around the CARES Act implications and some of the other items that you could see going forward. So my name's Joy Mariner. I'm the partner on the engagement, which means that I have ultimate responsibility for making sure that the financial statements that are presented here are fairly and materially correct. This financial statement goes to the federal government, it goes to the state government, it goes to the bonding agencies, to the rating agencies. It's used to apply for grants. But ultimately, this is what you want to have be right, because your decisions for your borough are based on the information that's in here and the information that you're provided for throughout the year. So we come in and make sure that the financial statements are materially correct. And that's what you've hired my firm to do. And so that's ultimately my job, making sure that the financial statements are materially correct. But your finance team, Cheyenne and her team, put all this information together. There's a lot of information in here. And I'll cover just a couple of highlights of things that are in here, which maybe are helpful for you as you're communicating with your constituents and to the people in the community. But also really, if you remember, my responsibility is make sure those are materially correct. So I work for you as the assembly, and this is my final report. It's much smaller. And I want to go through a couple key highlights on that final report to you. So on page 3 is the status of our audit. The third bullet point is probably the most important. We did issue an unmodified or a clean opinion on the audited financial statements. That's what the bonding agencies are looking for, the granting agencies are looking for. And we also issued an unmodified opinion on your compliance with your federal and state grant awards. That's a pretty big deal. Now, in 2020, we did not audit the CARES Act program because most of your money was spent in 2021. So our audit covered through June 30th of 2020, and that CARES money went out the door really after that time. So 2021's audit is going to be interesting, and is going to be a lot of work for your team because that CARES Act program is brand new. And some of the requirements really weren't even known at the time you were spending the money, which is one of the only times that's ever happened in my 20-year history of working with federal grants. So it's, I will say we do read the assembly minutes all the way through the issuance of the statements, which was in February. And you did a great job of talking about that, of being conservative, making sure you're following the spirit of the law, documenting everything as best you can. So I'm not anticipating any issues with 2021. Certainly you weren't taking any aggressive positions on how to spend the money, but rather following the guidelines very well. But that's for next year. The next page I want to talk about is on page 4. So there's a few numbers in your financial statements that are a little bit estimated. The biggest one is really your pension liabilities, but you cannot change that estimate. It's a statewide pension liability and an other post-employment benefit liability. It's PERS, it's TERS, it's those systems. You can't pay that liability off. You pay it every time you pay payroll. You pay an amount to the state of Alaska. You also have estimates of your landfill closure and how much that's going to cost at the time the landfill cell is closed. There's an engineering estimate of that, and then you accrue that cost over the life of the amount of time you expect it to take to fill that. So once that is done, you've expensed everything associated with it. So that's an estimate because we don't know what the cost will be. We don't know what the technology might be that makes that closure cost go down. And that's a really interesting nuance to financial statements because you want to match the cost of running an operation with the people using it, right? You don't want to just stick the people at the very end of the landfill life with the cost of that.
So through the mayor, I do actually have a question
Sure.
in that regard. So is that estimated liability expensed each year against the landfill?
Correct. Mhm.
Okay,
So under the accounting standards, you accrue an expense basically every year based on the percentage of the landfill that was used for that year. And then periodically you review that landfill closure cost. Is our closure cost estimate still realistic given what's being put into the landfill, given environmental requirements or DEC regulations or federal government regulations, and then also technology. We have seen over the years sometimes they can do things to actually make landfills last longer. Hey, if we just dig out over here, or we add this chemical, or we treat this, or we burn this, now suddenly that life gets extended.
Right.
But it is accrued and expensed annually.
so yeah, I guess I was just curious on that because it does appear that under business-like activities for our two enterprise funds, we're running a $1.8 million surplus of revenue over expense for the landfill, and then a $1.8 million deficit on the port enterprise fund, netting basically out on business-like expense. Is that so?
Let me catch up with you.
But that expense on the landfill already accounts for the future, or at least our estimate of the future liability there.
Yes, and I can tell you what that number additional, what we call an accretion expense was, but it's actually not maybe as big of a number as you might expect. Let me just flip to the right spot on there. So $636,000 was accrued into that liability during the course of 2020. So included in expenses for the landfill is $636,000 of landfill closure estimated costs. That is being, expensed through into that fund this year. Absolutely. Great question. So those estimates are things that, we don't know hard and fast what they're going to be, but most of the numbers in your financial statements are actual numbers, right? The amount of money that came into the borough, the amount of money that was spent, the amount you paid on payroll, the amount you paid for construction, all of those costs, your debt, those are all hard and fast numbers. If we look at next page, which is page 5, when we talk about the audit adjustments. So your team does an excellent job of talking with us throughout the year. And we don't believe that any of the adjustments, there's one exception, any of these adjustments are what we would consider to be audit adjustments, errors that we found. There's one exception to that, and that's the first one. Although I will say that even this one is a timing issue. It isn't anything that they were tracking wrong overall. But your investment account, your investment revenue was being recorded, basically only the realized portion, the amount that you actually got was being recorded into revenue, which is a very conservative way of actually recording revenue for investments because you don't have access to all those unrealized changes. But it was just an accounting error. It was being recorded into a wrong account. So none of the money was lost. The total amount of the investment was being recorded properly, but that one entry was being put into the wrong account. Now, I will say that this, you did change over your controller this year. And also you had a pandemic and your CARES Act money going out the door all at the same time as we're closing the books and records for the audit. So, frankly, I'm very impressed with the way the borough's handled this year. So one entry, and it was $8 million, but it's one entry that you don't have access to. That's just the change in the investment balance that tomorrow might be a different number, right? It goes up and down with the markets. But that one entry was recorded into the wrong account. The money wasn't missing. It was accounted for. It was just recorded into the wrong account, and it was corrected by us. These other entries are things that we assist with, just generally speaking, to help the borough with their financial records during the close of the the books and records. So that's your pension adjustments. That's something we've always assisted. They're very complex entries. Also, your bond refunding this year is a very complex transaction, so we help with the recording of those entries. And then lastly, the state did decide to do debt reimbursement this year, and so we assisted them with making sure that those receivables were booked into the correct period. Some of the money from the state came pretty late on the debt reimbursement, and you notice in your budgets, you didn't budget for that. It was conservatively budgeted on your end, but you ended up getting quite a bit of debt reimbursement. So those are more technical assistance adjustments. The investment one, as I said, is really just an accrual entry. Nothing was missing going in or going out. It was just an account difference. And then there are two items that are considered uncorrected misstatements. So these are items that we identified that aren't in the CAFR at all, right? The other ones were adjusted and fixed. These ones were not. One is a small amount of depreciation. And if you look there, I think it's $81,000, $41,000, so even smaller. Depreciation isn't a number that's cash out the door either. It's just an estimated life of an asset. And that was just on the depreciation schedules. There was an error in the calculation, what I would consider to be pretty insignificant. And it was just a timing difference. And then the other one has to do with how you amortize your debt. Because of the way that you budget, you're amortizing on a straight line basis all of the premiums for your debt. I won't go into the details of that. All that to say is just you're following this policy. The accounting policy is slightly different, but it doesn't change anything about when you pay your debt or how you pay your debt or how much you're ultimately going to pay on your debt. It's just an accounting calculation that you're doing in a much more efficient way. Some governments, and I audit governments, actually serve as concurring reviewer in governments all over the country. Some of them have an entire employee whose job is just to track those entries in accordance with GAAP. So you're following kind of a more efficient manner, just a straight line. We're just going to take the 30 years and divide it by, of premium divided by 30. So actually ends up saving you a lot of time and effort that you don't record that entry. So I would advise you continue to do it the way you have been. And Cheyenne and I have been talking about that and monitoring that for years. So those are our audit adjustments. And we'll talk really quickly on the next page about a couple of key things. One, your CARES Act money, you did receive a significant amount of CARES Act money. Some of it you received before June 30th. That's a significant transaction. And then the other weird one is for Houston Middle School, 5.9 million of the school district money was going to received for use on that Houston Middle School reconstruction. We're not sure ultimately how much of it will be needed, but that was recorded and tracked in the financial statements themselves.
Why did you use the words a discretely presented component unit under that 5?
Yes, because isn't that, it's an excellent question. That's the accounting term for the component unit. It is part of the borough, but it has its own financial statement. So when we look at the statements, you'll see it has its own column. You could in theory consider the landfill, could legally be set up as a component unit. It's not here, but in some communities, enterprise funds are set up as legal separate entities, and those are considered to be blended, meaning they're a fund of the government. The school district has its own board, so it's a discretely presented component unit.
Hey, thank you.
And then the last item I'll talk about on the audit wrap-up is on page 8 and 9. We have to tell you if we had significant disagreements or difficulties, issues with the audit, any fraud, abuse, any of those types of things, nothing to report there. We did report on page 8 the material adjustment related to investment income. But again, that doesn't mean that any money was missing. It was really just recorded into one area of the balance sheet instead of being recorded into investment income. So that did change the financial statements. That was the only item to report during the course of the audit, which in a year when you're dealing with a complete shutdown and a controller turnover was a pretty significant change for your accounting department. Talk to your peers at other cities and governments and boroughs, and they'll tell you that isn't always the case when you have turnover. So having a great team, your new controller, Liesel, did just a fantastic job with the audit prep when she was also getting all of these grant monies out the door. I wish you were here today so I could thank her myself. I'd like to go over just a couple pages on the CAFR. Before I do, I'll just highlight the tabs here. There's a lot. The ones that are most important for you and will provide the best information for you as you talk to people in the communities would be the tab that says Management Discussion and Analysis. And it's not that long. This is like an annual report. It kind of gives a narrative about what's happening during the course of the year and what changes you had from last year to this year. Especially on that report, I would say if you can only read just a couple pages before your eyes turn blurry and you fall asleep, I would recommend you read through page 12 and 13 of that, and 14, 12, 13, and 14. So I'm not going to do that with you today, but that would be a really beneficial thing for you to do as an assembly member. And the other thing I'll mention is you do have some really good things in your introductory section. So in the very first tab, there is a transmittal letter that your borough manager and finance director draft for you. And if somebody's ever asking you about your borough, maybe from out of state or somebody who's new to your community, and you just want to give them a profile of the borough, these few pages here, and it starts with Roman numeral 7, V11, VII. That's just a few pages is a really good overview that your team puts together about your borough. So that's another good tool. And the last thing I'll highlight for you is towards the back, there's the statistical section. It has its own blue tab. And the statistical section has some pretty cool stuff in it and 10-year trends. So for example, if you want to see what your taxable assessed value of property is, that's on page 183. And you can see over the last 10 years what that total taxable assessed value is. So again, I'm not going to go through every line item in this CAFR, but I did want you to get a sense of what information you might have in here. The statistics have things like your tax rates, actually even shows your principal taxpayers on the subsequent pages. So this is really good information for you as an assembly member, and we give you a paper copy, and you should also have access to this in PDF form. So it's something to keep on your desk and refer to as you move through this year. And then I'd like to just finish up with a couple key financial statement highlights, and that's on page 20 and 21. I'll pause for a moment. I know I'm going fast, trying to keep you all on time in your agenda. So page 20 and 21 give you an overview of the borough and all the things that you own and all the things that you owe to others. And I'll give you a couple, and you can see the school district has its own column there on this statement. So a couple key highlights. As expected, your majority of your assets are held up in actual capital assets. So that's this building, it's roads, it's infrastructure, it's all of the different assets the borough owns. And that's over $1 billion. That's not something you easily have access to sell or liquidate. And then you also have a significant amount of money in cash and investments, which is really necessary in order to run an operation the size of the borough and to do all the different set-asides and the things that you have planned for. When you look at your liabilities, that's on page 21, the things that you owe to others. This is somewhat skewed by the fact that you have net pension liabilities there. At the borough, you've got over $42.5 million. That's just in the pension liability. You also have net OPEB liabilities. That's the healthcare component of PERS. But look at the school, $153 million. That's TERS and PERS liabilities. So those are monies you can't pay back. If you kind of back those out, it gives you a better picture of what your overall equity is. And you can see all the different kind of components of your long-term debt. You've got the bonds, your leave, your loans payable, notes payable, insurance claims. You can see the landfill closure liability should be in there. And so there's lots of different, yeah, that's the landfill closure is the last line item under liabilities. So you can see a lot of the different types of liabilities that the borough does owe at the end of June. And then if you turn to, I have three more pages to cover, then I'll turn it back over for questions. Page 23 gives you a little bit more of a breakout of that same conversation. What kind of assets or liabilities do we have, but on a fund level. So instead of at the borough-wide level where you see that long-term debt and you see those capital assets, this is just on a fund level. And this is what you're really able to control as an assembly, right? Your major funds this year are your general fund, school building debt service, which is paying the debt service on the school district debt. The Frontera School Debt Service Fund, which is specific to the Frontera School. And then the CARES Act is a new major program this year. Major fund. You have $33 million advanced as of June 30th. And then, over the course of 2020 calendar year, total coronavirus relief funding of $38 million overall. We don't know yet whether or not this new stimulus bill that's just passed will have any impact. If it makes it all the way down to the cities or boroughs, we'll see. But you can see in the general fund side, I think the money that we really look at there is actually on the following page, which is page 24. Your fund balances are all kind of broken out into different categories of what you have in set-asides. You have your fund balance stabilization, your reconstruction money for the school in Houston. All of these different set-asides are already in place for the general fund. And then your unassigned $15 million in the general fund is really for working capital and for the, running the day-to-day operations of the general fund, which is really important because if you turn to page 26, you can see that total expenditures in the general fund are almost $97 million for 2020. So we look pretty carefully. I look pretty carefully at your sustainability. I'm a taxpayer here in the borough, so it's important to me that you're sustainable. And, I think when you look long-term at fund balance and the amount of fund balance you have available, you don't want to be so stretched that it's difficult to make good investment decisions or good decisions for your operations. And so we look pretty carefully at that, and I know that your team does. That's why you have a fund balance stabilization policy in place. But the other thing I will say is that Cheyenne does an excellent job with her team of making sure that the funding plan makes sense. So I love being here for the bond presentations and finding that information out because it's a mix here at the borough of how that is being funded and making sure your cash flow makes sense, that you're doing those draws when you need to, that you're issuing bonds when you need to at the right timing. Last page I'll cover is the one that Assemblyman Sumner asked about, which is the enterprise funds. So the enterprise funds are the solid waste fund and the port. You can see the operations on page 31. So the port does have a significant amount of debt issued associated with it. So, that's why the port is major. The port doesn't have a whole lot in revenue. I think $14,000 in 2020. Solid waste is a different story. So the port does have an operating loss, but this is not necessarily a cash loss, because you did capitalize the port. Now, the port did overall actually operate at a loss, and that depreciation number is not a cash out the door number. Even without that depreciation number, the port is operating at a loss, right? But you kind of have to keep in mind that depreciation number is there. Now, that doesn't mean you don't have to fund the port debt service. You do. Right, and that's really what the debt is designed to kind of cover that. I believe your total debt payments in 2020 was principal and interest about $711,000 was paid out in debt. And then the landfill is a different story, thankfully. The landfill does have operating revenues and expenses, and that doesn't include that accretion expense for the landfill closure cost. Those are the main statements I wanted to cover with you. The notes start on page 34, and they just provide more information. So if you want to read the 5-page disclosure on what your cash and investments are in, or the 14-page disclosure on the pension liabilities, it's there and available for you. I won't go through it in detail here. But if you ever have a question about a number, look in the notes, because it's going to give you a little bit more information about what's contained elsewhere. And then I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have, but I'll just close by thanking your team. It's been an unusual year. I think I was on the phone with Cheyenne like all the way back in, March when this first happened, talking about how your controls were going to change. Well, the people can't come in here to sign things, and we're going to have to change things, and things will be electronic. And as much as we all hated a cybersecurity attack that did occur, it made for really good systems now, and in some ways really made the transition to a lot more electronic type of stuff a lot safer, in my opinion, than it would have been otherwise. I will also say, we were talking from the onset about the impact of CARES, how you're going to spend it, what documentation you need to have, especially not just CARES, but FEMA. I heard you talking about FEMA, and right from the very beginning, your team was asking me, Joy, what do I need to do? What documentation do I need to have? How do I make sure that we dot all our I's and cross all our T's? And that's the team that you want to have. We didn't have any exceptions to payroll approval, invoice approval, purchasing, nothing like that in the testing. And so that really speaks to the whole borough being part of the effort to do things the right way. And the right tone at the top here at the assembly, expecting that level of conscious effort and ethics from your team is really important. And they certainly came through this year. I've been really impressed, and happy to answer any questions that you may have. And I will also say that I'm available anytime. I do work for you. So if you have a question about this, run it through the mayor's office or the clerk, and then through Cheyenne. I'm happy to answer them as you have them.
Ms. Nowers, I think she's gonna.
Thank you. Thanks so much for the presentation. I was looking for the tab, the extra pot of money that nobody has to pay for. Is there, you got that one on there?
Yeah.
I'm just joking. I just wanted to confirm, and I think it would be that anybody in the public that wanted to take a look at this as well, that it gets posted on the website under I think it's the government transparency page. Is that where it goes? So if you want to find it online.
Yeah, so it's online under finance, under annual audit, there's a link and anybody can find it.
Thank you.
And your CAFR actually gets submitted to the Government Finance Officers Association at the nationwide level. And you've received the Certificate of Achievement in Financial Excellence for years. And they do an excellent job with this CAFR. It's really quite a package to put all together, and they do a really good job at putting that together.
Mr. Sumner?
Through the mayor, could you just explain to us non-accountants what it means to debit debt premium and then credit interest expense and net position?
Right. So when you issue bonds, they're either issued at a premium or a discount, depending on the market at the time. Most of your bonds are issued at a premium, which means that you actually receive more cash than the face value of the debt. Now that additional premium, each bond has a bunch of different issuances within it. I don't know if you know that, but every year essentially has a different issuance. So when you refinance your debt, your refund bonds, you can refund just portions. You can just say, I just want to refund these 3 years or these 5 years that have a different coupon rate than the other years. You typically refinance the higher coupon rate years, and Cheyenne does all of that, not me. I just audit it. But that premium, you can either attach it to each individual coupon, or you can say, okay, we issued this bond, it came out at $1 million premium. Instead of attaching it to each one, we're just going to say that over the next 30 years, we're going to take 1/30 of that $1 million for ease of, almost like depreciation. We're just going to amortize it over 30 years instead of saying this amount of the premium belongs to this coupon, this amount belongs to this coupon. Because from an administrative perspective, it's another employee that you'd have to pay for. And that kind of eats into the the whole point, right? And so your team does I won't call it the easy way, but the smart way, in my opinion. If I were writing accounting principles, I would make it that way. And I would say almost all my governments do it that way. I have one exception that doesn't do it that way. Everybody else does it the smart way. But accounting principles require it to be done where you say this premium is associated with this specific issuance. So when you pay that debt, you also amortize that specific premium. So it can fluctuate from year to year. It's very hard to track and budget for and all of those things. So your team does it the straight line way. So the accounting entry to fix it, in theory, to go from your way to the accounting way is an entry to increase. Well, I'll have to look at the debits and the credits, which way it's going. So it would be an increase to, decrease to interest expense and a decrease to the premium. And then the remainder is the amount that's accumulated over the past years. All that to say, this is actually not at the fund level. It doesn't hit your government, it only hits your government-wide statements. It doesn't hit any of your budgets. It doesn't hit any of your fund level statements. It doesn't change the actual payment even. And so that's where it just becomes kind of really a burden to do it the other way. But this is technically, if you were having to convert from one to the other, you would book a $4 million adjustment to do it. But again, it doesn't change the amount of cash that actually would leave the door in the end of the day. One of those annoying accounting things.
More questions? Mr. Yacht, have you been able to hear us and hear the report?
I can hear just fine. Everything's going great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, seeing nothing else, I want to thank you for such a thorough and articulate report. And your enthusiasm. It's wonderful to see. So, and there's one other thing, that Matsuburgo bid on the Arctic Winter Games for 2024, and we're looking for partnerships, and we want to avoid a negative cash flow, and so we'd welcome BDO. So, but thank you for your presentation tonight.
I'd be happy to do that. I have kids that would love to come out and see it even. So thank you very much.
I'm shameless, but but thank you very much.
Thank you.
We appreciate it.
That's all for manager's comments, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Spropoulos, you're up.
Okay, as previously threatened, I'm going to continue to go through the Constitution. Hopefully not put you to sleep too much. So remember, we've already gone through 1, 2, 3, and 4. So tonight we're going to talk about 5 and 6. So number 5 is service areas, right? So this is the local government section of the Alaska Constitution. So service areas are actually found in the Constitution, and they're to provide services within the borough, and they're run by the Assembly, subject to the provisions of law or charter. Again, I'm not going to read this to you, but the last sentence here, again, talks about the Assembly may authorize the levying of taxes, charges, and fees. This is why service area boards don't set rates, they set recommendations, right? The Assembly must do it. Why? The Constitution says so. And there are certain things that when you're granted legislative authority, you can't delegate to other people. And levying of taxes is a classic non-delegable power by an assembly. So when we talk about service areas, one of the things that the Constitutional Committee talked about was the inability of small communities to organize or incorporate when they just wanted a couple of things, maybe just road service, maybe just fire service, maybe water and sewer because they have a bad water table, maybe an erosion district, maybe a flood control district. The borough we also have a trails service area. It's currently inactive. However, so the constitutional framers thought it was important to allow service areas to be in a borough to meet that specific need. And you can see at the end here, they'll be preparing themselves for full self-government, because I think the idea was, again, by the constitutional framers, that an area in a borough might have a service area, then another one, and then at some point get to the point where, well, you have so many service areas, maybe incorporation simply becomes appropriate for that local community. An area like Talkeetna comes to mind simply because of the service areas that are there. You know, there's a flood and erosion control service area. There's a water sewer service area. There's a fire service area. There's a road service area. Certainly much bigger than just the town site, but you can see kind of a progression. There was also a few years ago, an incorporation petition from Big Lake that proposed to potentially be a city. Again, kind of following what the constitutional framers were talking about. Because if you remember back earlier when we talked about the prior minimum local governments, maximum local control, in service areas, that's reflected again when they say new service areas shall not be established if a new service area can be provided by an existing service area or incorporation or annexation to a city. Because again, when you look at the language, service areas are only in a borough. So we never talk about service areas in cities. Again, why? Because the Constitution says so. And it really is the prelude to becoming a more fully developed government, except it's just run by the assembly. Hey, my first question ever.
So reading the language of that, does that mean that you could not provide, say, police service areas outside of the city limits of Wasilla, say, because they could be provided by being annexed into the city?
It depends. If you were talking about providing a kind of a slim, remember, there's no limit on the amount of lots or the amount of areas served by a service area. So if you were proposing an incredibly tiny service area right outside the city limits, well, there might be some pushback from the local boundary commission or someone who would then say, well, no, Wasilla should seek either annexation or extension and extraterritorial jurisdictional powers. I don't know if you're all aware of this. I've mentioned it to at least some of you. You know, in Fairbanks, there's something like 140 road service areas. I mean, some of the road service areas up there literally have 20 lots. And so you have all these different boards and all these different people. So if you had something that small, it potentially could run into that. You know, a police service area that would encompass the core area would certainly be allowable, I think, under this section. But if it was incredibly tiny and right next to a city, that might come into play. Again, service areas are only by organized boroughs.
Can you have a service area within a city? Municipality?
Not within a city, but a city can be part of a service area if they consent by ordinance, such as the city of Wasilla is part of the Wasilla Lakes Fire Service Central. It's part of Central Fire Service Area. Why? The city, back whenever, for whatever reason, consented by ordinance to be part of the service area. And so the services are actually much broader than the area of the city, but can extend into the city by statute only if the city consents. Again, it's to eliminate multiple layers of government.
Does the voters have to vote on that in the city, or is it just the council?
I do believe it's just the city council. And so, right, it says that within an organized borough, established, altered, or abolished, subject to the provisions of law or charter. Well, what that means is there are statutes that apply. And a lot of times when various assembly members are talking about ideas or service areas, there are a lot of provisions of law. It's the way the Constitution says it. That just means the Alaska statutes. And there's a lot of them to be applied when the borough is talking about road service areas, fire service areas, and parks and recreation service areas. So changing those, altering them, combining them, abolishing them, in large part is subject to voter approval. And from time to time, you'll get ordinances that it'll say, it's not, this is one of those exceptions. You had one either last meeting or 2 meetings ago regarding the annexation of some properties into Central Fire Service Area because they're being subdivided. And there's specific ways and specific areas of state law that avoid that. The takeaway here is that the state legislature over the time have developed some kind of confusing rules with exceptions to exceptions and things like that, but they only apply to these three. The other takeaway is service areas don't exist aside from the borough. A lot of times you'll hear people say, well, we want to do this and the borough wants to do that. Service areas are part of the borough. They are administered by the borough. The borough assembly sets the tax rate. The borough administration administers the money, spends the money, provides the services, and they have no separate legal existence. They don't exist aside from the borough. The employees that work within a service area are employees of the Mat-Su Borough. And there's actually a Supreme Court case in Alaska that says that. The North Kenai Road Service Area tried to sue the Kenai Peninsula Borough. And the Supreme Court said, you can't, you don't exist. You're part of the borough, and an entity can't sue itself. And so we come back to this assembly may authorize the levying of taxes, charges, and assessments, which is kind of unique, because if you remember back in section 2, it says the state may delegate taxing powers to boroughs and cities only. Well, here in the service areas, the Constitution says the assembly can do it. So there's an open legal question in Alaska as to whether or not you would need the legislature to grant you powers to tax within a service area. There's an argument that you've got it even without legislative grant, which of course you do have legislative grant in Title 29 to levy charges, assessments, and fees within a service area. But that's an interesting quirk because it reads like there's a constitutional grant of power directly to a local government that didn't exist at the time it was formed. So that's all for service areas. And then the next section 6, this is going to be really quick. We talk about the unorganized borough, right? So we all kind of know what that is. We've got several organized boroughs in Alaska, and then you've got this whole other region that's just not a borough. It's not a city. It's nothing. And if you read this, it says unorganized boroughs, plural. There is room in the Constitution to have more than one unorganized borough. You know, the state legislature could set up committees to run different boroughs potentially. They haven't done that, right? So the state has seen fit to say, no, we have one unorganized borough. That way we kind of administer it. And then again, allowing for maximum local participation, it can exercise any function which the assembly can exercise in an organized borough. So same thing, the legislature would kind of step into the shoes of the assembly and do what it wants in the unorganized borough, which is the areas that don't have, you know, like we are, local representation. Where you really see this, and any state and local involvement, I should say, in unorganized boroughs is really the rural education areas. That really tends to be the area where you'd see local involvement. Other than that, I'm not aware of too many programs that exist. It's not that they're not there. I don't deal in that area. I don't work for the state dealing with the unorganized boroughs. There may be others, but that's kind of the most obvious example. And so when our framers of the Constitution said, you know, you're going to have some areas of the state that just aren't going to have a local government and that aren't going to be there. And from time to time, there are proposals to form boroughs that fail. I believe the Delta borough was proposed several years ago, maybe a decade ago or more, and it failed so by over 90%. And so the people up there said, no, we don't want unorganized. We don't want to be a borough. We're going to stay in the unorganized area. So that's it. That's sections 5 and 6.
What's next? Somewhere in hours, please.
Just had 2 questions. You had the fire service area and the road service area, and then you said parks and recreation. Is that what you also called the trail service area?
The trail service area could be a parks and recreation area. So by state law, there are very strict rules about altering, amending, forming, combining, moving the boundaries of those 3 particular types. Parks and rec service areas, I suppose Chase Trail Service Area would fall under that. But remember, it's a state law, so it applies to all boroughs. It applies to, you know, Kenai and Fairbanks and Kodiak and us and Ketchikan and Aleutians East, Arctic Northwest. I don't know who has parks and recreation service areas. I typically say we don't have any because even though we have one on the books, I don't believe it's levied a mill rate in a very, very long time.
So the borough has the ability to do that, but we've had one in the past, but we don't have any now. Is that?
Yes, if you look in Borough Code, there is the Chase Trails Service Area is there. They have a 0 mill rate. They have no board. They have no services being provided.
And that was to build trails or maintain them?
It
Does
is
anybody remember?
it just says to operate trails and trail-related facilities, I believe.
Okay.
It's just specified in code.
Okay.
To form, as a second-class borough, to form any service area that we don't have the power to do, you have to put it to the voters. And the voters have to vote, and that would include the geography of the service area plus the powers of the service area. For
Okay.
example, we have a Port McKenzie service area down at Port McKenzie, and it is a giant combined road, fire, it can do natural gas, utilities, the sidewalks. It has a lot of powers. I think it was intentioned for port development. So you could have a service area, provide all these services that the borough does not provide on a non-area wide basis to be able to function and not have overlapping service areas.
And then my only other question, just out of curiosity, so if I remember right, we have like a erosion control or flood control district over in the Butte. Is that is a service area as well? Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Mr. Summer, do you have something?
Yeah, I think you'd mentioned that Delta had a referendum on forming a borough. Is that in state statute that they have to have a referendum, or is that? Because I don't believe there was ever a referendum on the original formation of boroughs in the state, if I'm not mistaken.
I'm going to get to that after we
okay.
get through this. I'll talk to you guys a little bit about the formation of boroughs and the Mandatory Borough Act of 1964, which is what formed us. But yes, in state statute, there are a couple of ways that local governments can form. And the most common of which is the local boundary commission will put a ballot question through the state of Alaska. We'll put the ballot question to the voters in the area to ask them. The only time that boroughs were forced to incorporate was in 1964 with the Mandatory Borough Act, and we're one of them. We'll talk about that later in a few more meetings after we get through all of this.
The more interesting question is trying to get out of a borough once you're in it. That's Lake Louise.
Detachment. Yeah, that's tough.
So, all right.
That's
wrap
it.
Okay, thank you. I enjoy your reports. Madam Clerk?
The clerk's report is in your red folder. It also includes next Tuesday's Joint Assembly Planning Commission meeting. And also, Mr. Brown sent out the proposed budget schedule last week, and it is on the clerk's report. They're in bold. Are these meetings the Assembly wants to schedule?
Let me take a look. Can you read them, Madam Clerk?
Sure. April 8th would be departmental budget presentations. April 27th, 29th, and May 6th would be public hearings for the budget. So there's 3. And then in May 11th, May 13th, and May 20th would be deliberation dates, Mr. Mayor.
And the location of the budget hearing meetings?
Generally, Mr. Mayor, we have one here, we have one in Wasilla, and we have one in Willow. However, where we have it in Willow is closed as it's being remodeled, or a new building's being built. So I'm open to know if you guys want to hold one further up north.
We were thinking about Sioux Valley High School because the Willow Community Center, that'd be up at the Y. So you'd connect a lot of people. What does the Assembly think of that? And then the second one here in the Valley, we should find a location too. We have one right here in this.
We do
chamber.
have one here in the Assembly chambers, Mr. Mayor.
And then, so, any objection to her working on Sioux Valley for this year, budget hearing? So that looks good.
That is all I have. If the Assembly's good with those
And
meeting
usually
dates.
it's at the Menard Center here in the Valley. Is that what everybody wants?
That
to-
is, oh, sorry, Mr. Mayor.
Even though they're charging us outrageous amounts of money. So we'll be negotiating heavy on that, so we may be back to you on this one. Okay. So that would be it. So anything else? Madam Clerk?
That was it, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Citizen other correspondence? Are there any comments on the citizen other correspondence? You know, we were talking about at the planning session about this. This is your way to really see what your community councils are doing, your road service areas. This is their communication to you, assembly members. So here, no objection or anything on the comments. They are presented. Madam Clerk, the IMs.
IM 21037, inform the Assembly of the borough's intent to enter into a cooperative management agreement for a 5-year term with the Alaska State Department of Transportation and Public Facilities on borough-owned land located on Tract B, Squentina Airport Survey for the shared use of building structure. IM 21015 041, informing the assembly of a grant amendment the borough manager will be asked to sign relating to response to the COVID-19 pandemic. IM 21042, informing the assembly of an agreement for the community assistance program that will be presented to the borough manager for signature. IM 21044, informing the assembly of a grant amendments from the Alaska State Department of Military and Veterans Affairs for the 2018 Cook Inlet earthquake that are to be presented to the borough manager for signature.
Comments or questions on the IMs? Hearing none, IMs are presented. There are no persons to be heard. We're at public hearings. We've reached public hearing time. If you are present, please sign up to speak in the back of the room, please. If you have called into the meeting to testify by telephone, please hit *3 when you hear the public hearing you would like to speak to being read into the record. Madam Clerk, Resolution 21015.
A resolution adopting the fiscal year 2021-2022 capital improvement program. And if you're on the phone and would like to speak to this item, press *3.
Staff report. There we go. Ms. Lillian.
Thank you, Mayor Halter, Manager Brown, and members of the Assembly. What you have before you tonight is the current CIP Capital Improvement Program list for 21-22. Nominations to this list were solicited last January through March. The list was compiled and then presented to the Planning Commission in November, and then it's here now for public hearing. Last year, the former planning director amended the CIP nomination process in that the list has been collected since 2004. And so over time, as projects were nominated to list, they stayed on the list. And so in 2018, I guess it was, there were about 500 projects on the list. And so the former planning director decided, let's simplify the list and make it so that people have to nominate projects to the list every year. And if you don't renominate, the project falls off the list. Another reason why she simplified the CIP process was that Public Works already supports 2 other CIP lists that are connected to the annual borough budget. The road service area list, where road projects are nominated, and then the capital projects list, where capital improvement projects are nominated with justification, and then additional planning projects are nominated. So having us have this list and then the 2 other, it just was starting to get really complicated. So the process was simplified in that the list that planning manages and the one that's before you, the projects aren't ranked or scored. They're not associated with borough funding. They're a list that the community has requested for projects. And so in addition to that, the different departments submit projects to the list. The road service area also submits projects to the list. The different boards and commissions submits projects to the list. The community councils submit projects to the list. And why we keep this list and why it started is that it's used for these community groups and even our departments to seek additional funding outside the borough. So often for federal and state appropriations and grant programs and private foundations to get funding, they want to see that there's community support for a project. So by having the Assembly approve this current list, it's your acknowledgement that the community requested these projects. It's not saying that they're your priorities. It's that they're a list of community projects that the community would like to see happen in their community. The process that we went through last year was a little bit in transition. We've already spoken to Manager Brown. We plan to continue to revise the process that planning implements to solicit these nominations to further clarify the difference between this list and the capital improvement list and the RSA road list. I just want to acknowledge that it's confusing but it is of value because community projects can seek for funding requests if their project is on this list. So we haven't sent out nominations for next year, but anyway, sorry, I'll stop talking. I feel like I want to explain to help you understand the list and its origin and where we are at today.
Okay, thank you. I will open the public hearing at this time. Is there a sign-up list? We don't have a sign-up list, according to the clerk in the back of the room. Anybody on the telephone? Anybody? 2 people on the telephone, so we'll take our first caller, please.
Okay, I believe I'm the first caller. I was just told I was unmuted. My name is Sherry Rusher, spelled R-U-S-H-E-R. I'm president of the Meadow Lake Senior Housing, and I'm addressing IM 21-034. And I am quite concerned. There is a proven need for senior housing in Mat-Su. I can recite all the reasons, but you've heard them many, many times. Our senior population is one of the fastest growing segments in our borough, which is one of the fastest growing areas in the state. Meadow Lakes has a master plan that includes 3 senior housing buildings. They have developed 1 building and the community park part of that plan. They brought natural gas back into a neighborhood and are good stewards of the land. The 1 building already done is operating very successfully. It was built under the AHFC Home Program, using funds from Rasmussen, Denali Commission, State of Alaska, and loans. These applications for funding was supported by having our senior housing on the CIP list. No borough money was used for the project, just the support that our community members, our council members, and our borough assembly supported senior housing. The CIP list shows that community support for the project. It was approved by vote by our community council members and the Borough Planning Commission. This community support is used to secure funding from other sources and is very helpful. The removal amendment came up very quickly with no time for public input or proper preparation. Should this amendment not send the CIP list back to the Planning Commission for review with reasons provided for the removal? It was approved by them and the community input there. I feel they should approve the removal of our senior housing from the CIP list. I don't understand how removing this support for this project would benefit the Meadow Lakes Community Council, the Mat-Su Borough, or seniors in our area all over that live in Mat-Su. What is the reason? Thank you for your time. Bye.
Thank you. Next caller, please.
Yes, my name is Patricia Fisher. I am president of the Meadow Lakes Community Council, and I wish to speak regarding this removal, this amendment to IM 21-034, which removes Birch Creek Villa from the CIP list. Ms. Rusher, who just spoke, gave you the facts on the housing facility, so I'm not going to go into that. But I do want to mention a couple of things. No borough money was involved in the building of this project to start with, and the item in the CIP list to date is not a request for funds. It is simply a statement of long-term intent to build additional units. The borough website says, and I quote, "The benefit of the capital improvement plan is to provide a list of projects with community support for possible funding sources. This list will be adopted by the Assembly, showing community support for grant applications and other potential funding sources," unquote. The CIP list has always been the place to designate future projects, and there are any number of projects on that list which are not borough projects. Like the bike path along Pittman, that's not a borough road. Turn lane to the Midnight Sun Charter School. Off of Pittman, same thing. KGB road turnouts. KGB is not a borough road. Part of Vine Road is not a borough road, and there are projects along there. So that list does not just incorporate projects that are on borough land. What it includes is projects that are important to the community. So in 2020, residents of Meadow Lakes were asked for input into the CIP list, which is before you tonight. The residents gave their input, and the list was approved by a vote of the members of the community council. So an amendment whereby an assembly person who is not from District 7 can try to extract one project from the Meadow Lakes list, it is very perplexing that that could happen. To what purpose is the removal of that one item? And how is it allowed that that process can happen, that it is overturning the wishes of a community council with one project being removed? So thank you very much for hearing my testimony.
Okay, thank you. Any other telephonic callers? Okay, next caller, please.
There. Okay, I think I'm up here.
You're coming in broken. Can you hear us?
Yeah, I can. This is Terry Boyle. I'm also with the Meadow Lakes Community Council in Birdsville. I'm on the board of directors grid also, and I second what Sherry and Patty both have said, because it makes sense for us to stay on the agenda list, just because it helps us with going after other monies for things. But we basically haven't had to dip into the borough's pocket to do what we've been wanting to do out here. So that's pretty much what I have to say. We've been really good stewards of the land that we do have. And the community itself really likes what we've done. So I just think that's something that needs to be said. And that's pretty much all I have. Thank you guys for hearing me out.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Boyle. Any other telephonics? Anybody in the audience wish to speak on this issue? Mr. Abrams, you want to talk?
My name is Eugene Carl Haberman, Alaska resident for over 43 years, approximately 20 of those years a resident of Anchorage, and currently a resident of Matanuska-Susitna Borough. On the item that's before you right now for public hearing, there's several issues of concern. Number one, I do see the resolution from the Planning Commission. Yes, it's there. But what has happened to, remember, we're talking about the CIP, okay? You got roads, you got a whole mess of different things there. This is a standard. Goes year after year. This is brought up for a public hearing at the Assembly chambers. But what about things like the Transportation Advisory Board? Where's their resolution and review? What about the Aviation Board? They still exist. And what about the situation of timing, allowing the community councils to have a really wide time of when they meet? How can they possibly address this thing before you, when many of those community councils schedule does not coincide with when you are going to introduce this thing for public hearing? I would strongly encourage you to have at least 2 public hearings to help remedy the situation. But even with that, you need to go back and connect and get a review by the parties I just said, the Aviation Advisory Board and Transportation Commission, because they need to play a part in this, and they need to announce and introduce those items to address the consideration and hear public comment. And you're not doing that. But also what's missing is also when you look at the comments, where are they? we're in a blank. We see a resolution from the planning commission, but we don't see the comments coming from what was said from the public and who spoke on the issue. Again, we're having a situation in regard to this, but I cannot stress continued concern of the failure of the Matsu Borough when holding these public meetings to really work and connect with the people before you make those decisions. But it's evident with this item, you're not having a real conversation. And with COVID still as a situation on people's minds throughout this state, you need to make more of an effort to bring them in. And remind you, this is pretty much an empty room here. How many people from the public? Maybe 3, 4 members of the public here. The rest is government officials and members of the press. Are you really hearing from the public? And a handful on the telephone line? Are you really hearing from the public and many of the community councils exist in the Matsu Borough? You're not. And so you cannot approve this item tonight. You need to continue public hearing on this, but even that, put it off in the scenario of, and face reality that you need, the homework was not done here, and you need to connect with those other parties, and it needs to come back here. Thank you very much. Respectfully.
Yeah, any other telephonics? Okay, anybody in the audience wish to speak? Otherwise, I'm going to close out the public hearing at this point in time, which I'll do. Somebody, Bovee, could you move this? Gonna get to that.
I'll move to adopt resolution 21-015.
Okay, now we'll open it up for discussion. Mr. Two?
Yes, Mayor, I'd like to move to amend the CIP list, page 4, by striking 398 Dejoba Road and Colleen Drive, and strike 401 Sand Pile Storage Development to align with the Assembly did with the RSA project list.
Clerk, do you have this? Could you give us a quick read back or let us? So we're removing page 398, page 4, project 398.
Yeah, page 4, line 398.
Okay.
And line 401.
Okay.
Can you read it back,
No,
Mr. Mayor?
that's- everybody-
Okay.
Everybody good on that? Any objection to, first of all, any discussion, Ms. Bovee?
Yeah, I'm going to object. I do understand, what the assembly action was, but that was specifically related to the coming year. And I think this is a wish list. And I think it's important that we continue to leave these items on there if future opportunities would present themselves.
Okay, on Mr. Two's page 4 amendment and line 398 and line 401. Any further comments, Ms. Nowers? You got your light on.
I'm sorry, I'm trying to find it here. Page 4, and you said Colleen?
Page 5, is that 401?
Sorry, did I put on, I might have put page 4 on Assemblymember 2's. It's page 5.
Excuse me. So
Okay.
page 5,
Oh, okay.
line 398 and 401.
I heard Colleen Street, which I believe is in my district, and I don't understand what you're trying to align with. So
Number 398 is Jojoba Road and Kluani Drive.
Okay, none are in my district. You know what district those projects are in?
Mr. Mayor, they're in Assembly District 5.
Okay. Mr. Hale?
So the sand storage, the sand pile storage project is borough-wide in all of the service areas, and my road service area supervisor was opposed to that being changed when we changed it before, and I'm sure he would continue to be opposed to changing it in the long term. So I'm going to oppose that.
Mr. Brown, what is the status of this?
So, Mr. Mayor, when the Assembly took action to approve the RIP list, this is the confusion that is created that Ms. Solian alluded to, is the RIP list sand and chip storage development was removed from all RSA RIP lists in total borough-wide. Additionally, there were additional amendments to RSA 21's RIP list. So what Mr. Two's proposing aligns these projects that are in District 5 and RSA 21 with the approved RIP list. The sand and chip storage development, as Mr. Hale alluded to, is borough-wide. So this is where the confusion gets created when there was one that was previously approved. So that's one of the process changes I think we would look at moving forward, is to eliminate that redundancy so you don't have this disconnect between a previously approved and amended and approved list, and then having that also in another document. So I think in the future, that's what we would look to do to resolve this long-term. In the meantime, if it's the Assembly's desire, we would make these amendments to align them with the previously approved RIP list.
So you as manager support this amendment?
This amendment would align with what the Assembly previously approved for the RSA RIP projects. However, I do understand that this list does not need to mirror the RIP list as well. So if the desire was to retain kind of those wish list or those larger projects, because there is no appropriation or prioritization tied to this project list.
Ms. Bovee, then Mr. Sumner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, most of these roads aren't on the RIP list. I mean, if we're going to start aligning it with the RIP list, we could be here for hours. This was never the intent. This is not the RIP list. This is a wish list. This is a community CIP list. These are roads that were requested by RSA, Community Council, and a variety of boards and members, as discussed by Ms. Solomon.
Mr. Sumner, then we better vote on this.
Yeah, the amendment's totally harmless, as projects aren't gonna happen. They were removed from the RIP list anyway, so, I mean, I don't see that it's objectionable or even really that much of a point for debate.
So your argument is it doesn't matter if it's on or off, so. Ms. Nowers?
I was gonna make a similar argument. I mean, this allows the community to go out, and if they find funding for it, they can do it. So it doesn't have to be a borough priority. So I'd just rather give them that opportunity, leave it on.
Mr. McKee, are you gonna call a question?
I call the question on the amendment. Yes.
Thank you. He's my guy down here. Okay, so I call the question, any objection to voting on this amendment? No objection, so any objection to passing Mr. Two's amendment? There is objection, so Madam Clerk.
Go ahead and please vote. Assemblymember Yunt. Oh, excuse me. Assemblymember Yunt.
The question, so is there objection to Mr. Two's? I want to make sure I answer this correctly. Can you?
So what we're on right now is Assemblymember 2's amendment to strike Jojoba Road and Kualani Drive and the sand and pile storage development.
Yes.
Mr. Mayor, it passed with Assemblymember Hale, Nowers, and Bovee opposed.
Are we ready to vote on IM 21034? Mr. Sumner.
So I did want to address project number 111. I had an amendment that I'm thinking I won't move actually at this time, but the character of every project on this list is for public use, roads and bike trails and that sort of thing, general public use. But with the exception of project 111, which is to build 2 8-plexes in Meadow Lakes that'll be held by a private entity. So I'm not sure that it is appropriate for it to be on this list, but I'm not going to undermine whatever state or federal grants they think that they may be able to get. But I might point out, though, that there's a lot of these senior housing complexes being built across the entire borough, and none of the other ones come to us for support. I mean, strike out on their own. And most of them are pay property tax as well, because they're not held in a nonprofit structure. I'm not going to move my amendment this time, but I do think it's rather objectionable for it to be on the list.
Okay, any other discussion? Any objection to passing IM 21034 that was amended by Mr. Tu?
Resolution 21015, Mr. Mayor.
Any objection? Madam Clerk had the correct number. I missed by 20. No objection. Mr. Yacht, any problems with passing the IM? Or the
No, sir.
resolution? How come I have IM written in this one? This is. Okay. Any objection, Mr. Yacht?
No, sir.
Okay, it's passed. The resolution has passed. Anything else on audience or on public hearings? It doesn't look like.
We
So
do
we're-
have one more, Mr. Mayor.
Oh, excuse me.
Ordinance 21018, an ordinance accepting and appropriating $231,191 from the Federal Transit Administration to Fund 480, project number 20396, Community Transit for the Matanuska-Susitna Borough Centralized Mobility Management Software Project for the accompanying resolution 21014, a resolution approving the scope of work and budget and authorizing the borough manager to enter into a grant agreement with the Federal Transit Administration for the Matanuska-Susitna Borough Centralized Mobility Management Software Project. And if you're on the phone and would like to speak to this item, press *3.
Okay, thank you, Madam Clerk. Staff report?
I think I need to leave on this, Mayor.
Yeah, state your conflict for us, please.
My relationship with Valley Transit.
Is what?
I have a relationship with Valley Transit. My daughter.
Okay, daughter works, okay. I think you're correct. You can step out and we'll come and get you when this is over. Okay, staff report.
Thank you, Mayor Halter, Manager Brown, members of the Assembly, Kim Solian, Planning Department. What you have before you tonight is the opportunity to accept grant funds from the Federal Transit Authority and to combine those funds with a grant that we received from Matsu Health Foundation to support this centralized dispatch system for our transit providers in the borough. And so this is a project that we've been working on over the past 2 years since the borough doesn't directly support public transportation. We've been working with area transit providers, Sunshine Transit, Chickaloon Transit, Matsu Senior Services, and Valley Transit to figure out how we could help them reach our citizens that need support with public transportation. So this grant that we're asking you to accept and appropriate will allow us to go into a formal relationship with Valley Transit. They will purchase special software so that if someone in the valley needs a bus ride, they will call one central number or go on one website and schedule their ride instead of having to figure out, do I call Chickaloon? Do I call Sunshine? Do I call Valley Transit? So like I said, it's a culmination of multiple years of meetings with all the area transit providers. We applied for a Federal Transportation Authority grant, and they are ready to award the grant for this project.
Okay. Mr. Sumner, questions?
So through the mayor, this is like some sort of dispatching software, like a cab company might have or something along those lines?
Yeah.
So are they running like Medicaid or Medicare voucher rides to hospitals and that sort of thing?
Yeah, most of or a lot of the clientele that are folks that are using rides, they go everything from medical appointments to get to work, to get to an AA meeting, to bring the kids to Cub Scouts. There's a whole range of services that the transit providers in the valley are providing to riders. And so as part of accepting this grant, we had to create an equitability and accessibility plan to make sure that however anyone was paying, or if they had a voucher, that we had a system to either take that payment or collect that fee from the provider. And that if they didn't have a phone or a computer, there was still an ability for either someone else to make the ride appointment for them or to provide that access. We wanted to make sure our most disadvantaged population that really needs a ride had equitable access to this service once we start this dispatch coordination.
Anything else? Thank you for the staff report. Ms. Bovee? Oh, excuse me, I got to do a public hearing. I'm just not here tonight. I will open the public hearing at this time. Anybody in the audience wish to speak? Do we have a sign-up list to start with? No sign-up list. Any telephonics? No telephonics. Mr. Haberman?
My name is Eugene Carl Haberman. I live in the Matsu Valley. Follow the public process. When the public process done, appropriate decision made by the governing body is more likely public interest. I think it needs to be said from the beginning, dealing with the issue, and it relates to this item respectfully, the issue of recognizing conflict of interest. Okay. Now, what proceeded before public testimony and staff was appropriate step. Assembly member recused himself because of a conflict of interest. That was done appropriately, except for it should have been done way back when these items were introduced for public hearing. Because you have introductions at one meeting and then public hearings the next. We are now in the public hearing stage. Also, it concerns me that just saying that they have a conflict, they should address what that conflict is. That didn't happen tonight. Obviously, many of you know there is a relationship with Valley Transit with one assembly member, but the fact is it should have been clearly stated what that relationship is. That was not done tonight. And it would lead to a situation, respectfully, that this ongoing, where there's a conflict, is not being clear to the public and you before actions are taken. And this has to stop. It really does. Now, with regard to this item that you got before you, outside of the conflict issue that I raised, I still raise concerns is basically, we're dealing with federal money, but where are you connecting with the boards and commissions and other bodies that are out there? You go for the money, but you don't respectfully. Remember, when you go for like federal funding, there is the expectation that you do the public process appropriately. You connect with the parties and not just fast track it like this. So I'll just end that there with my comments, but also with just one point to remind you, which continues to be concerned and addressed for a number of years. Before you close public hearing, the chair needs to say the words, is there any objection for closing public hearing? Failure to do that respectfully it creates a situation that the chair usurps the power of the assembly. Thank you very much. That concludes my remarks with 31 seconds to spare.
Good job. Mr. Tu has clearly stated that his daughter worked for Valley Transit. That was the conflict. So that's good. You're done. Thank you.
We, the public, didn't see that statement. We have a right to see it.
He made it on the record. Okay, that's fine. Anyone else wish to testify on Resolution 21014? Any more telephonics? I'll close the public hearing at this time. Madam Bovee.
I move to adopt ordinance 21-018 and resolution 21-014.
Any discussion? Mr. Sumner?
Mr. Mayor, it occurs to me after staff comment that I may actually have a conflict of interest on this too, being as that they're going to accept Medicaid vouchers. I lent a substantial sum of money to ACAB, and they would be a competitor to this, and it may be seen that I would have an undue influence.
What do you think, Mr. Sprapless? Probably is a conflict.
I don't understand the nature of the potential conflict.
The borough's dispatch will allow them to go out and fulfill Medicaid voucher rides. I lent some
I'm not sure
tens
that-
of thousands of dollars.
I'm not sure that
to-
it's going to fulfill Medicaid voucher rights. This is for dispatching public transit generally within the borough. As I looked over it, it's really about scheduling and rides on-demand service for anyone who needs it, because, it's very infrequent, and centralized dispatch and mobility and software to support that. I don't know that these companies are engaged in, we'd have to go back and look through the operational bylaws of each and every one of these companies who form this consortium to find out if they do Medicare billing.
You lent money to whom now?
Cab company that does Medicaid voucher.
Which would be a direct competitor, you feel, with Valley Transit?
Yeah. It's conflicts are self-disclosed, Mr. Mayor, so it's your ruling.
I think I'll let you step out of the room on this one, so we'll finish up without you. Obviously, AM 21019 that was pulled, I think follows it, so.
Yeah.
Okay, anything further on Resolution 21014? Is there any objection to passing 21014? Mr. Yant, any objection?
No objection.
Okay.
No objection.
21014 passes, and we could tell two gentlemen to come back in, please, two assembly members. We've reached, that's it for public hearings tonight. We have reached audience participation. This is your opportunity to speak to the assembly about any topic. If you're on the phone and would like to speak under audience participation, please hit *3. You will hear your hand has been raised. Everyone wishing to speak under audience participation has 3 minutes. Telephonics, any telephonics? No telephonics? Anybody in the audience? Mr. Graham, come on forward, please.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the Assembly. Thank you for taking time to hear me today. My name is Stu Graham. I am a very proud resident of the borough and of the city of Wasilla, and of course of our great state of Alaska. But today I'm here to represent MTA, which is your local cooperative telecom provider, and to talk about two different things. Number one is to talk about the MTA Foundation Scholarship Program. The MTA Foundation gives out scholarships every year to students that are entering degree-seeking or certificate-seeking programs, to persons that are continuing education along that, and to persons seeking, vocational training leading to certification that could be used. These aren't limited to people that are only going to be returning to the borough, but last year we gave out 17 scholarships worth $75,000. The application period ends March 19th. I would appreciate everybody's participation in their various community councils and so forth for getting the word out so that we can have persons that are looking for continuing education or starting their education towards a degree. Please get that word out. Have them go to mtafoundation.com. It's an easy application, and we look forward to seeing many folks from your different districts. So I thank you for that. Also wanted to kind of give the borough a heads up on behalf of MTA about a new program coming forward nationwide calling 10-digit dialing. So 10-digit dialing means that you'll have to dial 10 digits as opposed to the 7 digits that you would have had to dial previously. 10-digit dialing has been brought forth because the Federal Communication Program is instituting a 988 direct dial number to establish a suicide prevention and mental health hotline. That hotline will be established not until 2022, until July of 2022, but we need to start making all of the different corrections to switches, to telephone systems like the borough has, to make those changes happening. So beginning in April 24th, you should begin using 10-digit dialing for local calls. That means you would dial a 907 or whatever area code you're in, and then the 7-digit number that you're used to dialing. What that will do is that will, in area codes where there is a 988 prefix, and here in the 907 area code, which is Alaska, 988 is a prefix that is used in Juneau. So all of Alaska will go to 10-digit dialing, as will several dozen area codes, throughout the nation. We just have to be one of the lucky ones. So beginning in April, you should start doing that. Beginning in October, the end of October, you'll have to start doing that. So if you dial 7 digits like you're used to, you will get something that says that your call can't be connected. So there, I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just giving you a little heads up information on what's coming down the pipe. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, members of the Assembly.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Anybody else in the audience? Any telephonics on? You want to speak? Go ahead, sir. State your name and.
My name is Jason Michael, Mayor Halter, Manager Brown, members of the Assembly. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. I'd like to speak on 3 points real quick. 2 of them have a past tense because I missed a couple of meetings. But first on COVID, I would appeal to you to remove the mask mandate from Mat-Su Borough properties. My daughter is involved in athletics in the Mat-Su Borough, and I watched last week as a referee awarded points to the opposing team because her mask came down during competition. I don't really feel that that's very fair. I can't breathe in a mask normally, let alone during sports. I feel like they want you to believe that COVID is a pandemic. I don't feel that it is. You didn't have to test to know that you had the bubonic plague. And I also wonder what happened to the flu in 2020. It seems to magically disappear, even though they've been trying to get rid of it for dozens of years. In 2019, approximately 2.9 million people died in the U.S. In 2020, with COVID, approximately 3.1 million died in the U.S. If the virus was a pandemic, why didn't 6 million people die? Why didn't 20 million people die? So I'd ask to please remove the mask mandate from borough properties. Second is the Arctic Winter Games. My sister actually won a medal in the Northwest Territory Games approximately 30 years ago for sprint dog mushing. She really enjoyed herself, had a great time. That said, I was concerned the night that you guys passed that to move forward when the borough agreed to donate $1.2 million of Mat-Su Borough employee time to help with the games in like-kind donations. If there are that many hours laying around in the borough with their employees, I feel like we should reduce the cost of government or remove some positions because there was talked about no overtime being added and it all being done with hours that are already being used. I don't feel like the Mat-Su Borough positions are being paid to help with the Arctic Winter Games, so they must have more time on their hands than they need. Lastly is property tax and assessments. A few meetings ago, I related to the same meeting as Arctic Winter Games. The head of assessments spoke about raising everyone's assessments 7% on average this year. In a year when a lot of people's incomes were frozen or vanished, to me that seems inappropriate. I'm just curious if anyone has ever stopped and wondered that property taxes don't need to go up just because property values do. I think if we reduce the cost of government, we could stop or slow down the tax increases or tax assessment raises. My idea is property values go up and taxes go down. That's kind of what prosperity looks like for the citizens of the borough, I believe, not the government raising assessments. So I'd ask that you please do what you can to reduce taxes and government. Thank you very much for your time tonight.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak? Mr. Haberman, you're up.
My name is Eugene Carl Haberman, Alaska resident for over 43 years, approximately 20 of those years a resident of Anchorage, and currently a resident in the Matanuska-Susitna Borough. While addressing you tonight, I am representing myself. Please note, I conduct an ongoing audit of the public process. When the public process is done appropriately, decision made by the governing body is more likely in the public interest. Next month, on April 4, 2021, will begin my 10th year in this work. I continue to audit the public process. I'm known by thousands of Alaskans throughout the state as the self-appointed government watchdog. During these years, I've frequently reported by concerns that you continue to be not in compliance with, number one, Alaska's Open Meetings Law, AS 44.62, .310. Number 2, the government body shall provide reasonable opportunity for the public to be heard at regular and special meetings, AS 29.20.02A. I am addressing you tonight with regards to my being a witness over the years during meetings at the Matanuska-Susitna Borough Assembly and the City Councils of Palmer, Houston, Wasilla, and School Board, where Assembly, Council, and School Board members, along with members of their administration staff, conducted a policy of prejudice, showing a preference for those that agree with them and disrespect, bullying, intimidation, and defamation with those that disagree with them without any protest by any Assembly or Council member or members of the administration to this disrespect. During these meetings, I had witnessed members of the press violate their professional journalism by rarely reporting what the public states at a public hearing, and instead generally report only statements by elected and government officials. Because of this known and recorded history, I instituted steps to protect myself from many of you who provide and continue to do so today a false narrative of events with regard to my ongoing work in auditing the public process. During one period of time, I refrained from speaking to anyone at the meeting or addressing the public over the microphone during public meetings held by the Matanuska-Susitna Borough Assembly. Later, I refrained from speaking to anyone in school board meetings, but allowed myself to address meetings when recognized to speak at the microphone on issues of concern. The only communications during this period were written notes I handed to public officials for the response to questions. Because of a return of unwarranted attacks by members of the administration at a recent school board meeting and an indifference by the superintendent and members of the school board, I'm announcing the following. Effective immediately, I will continue to attend public meetings held in the Matanuska-Susitna Borough, but will address these meetings either when being recognized to speak at the microphone where my remarks are being recorded and by providing written communications to parties for a written reply. This situation is necessary in order for myself to be protected by a false narrative of my behavior provided by elected government officials employed in the Matanuska-Susitna Borough. Thank you, with 16 seconds to spare.
Thank you. Anyone else? Any telephonics? Anyone else in the audience wish to speak? I will close out audience participation at this time. Madam Clerk, let's go to the consent agenda. We have 21-016 and 21-019 pulled. And the conflicts for 21-019 will apply to AM 21-019 under.
Resolution 2120, a resolution amending the scope of work for capital operating expenditures utilizing CARES Act money. AM 21018 awarded bid number 21125B to Capital Office in the contract amount of $141,765.47 to supply and install furniture, fixtures, and equipment at Station 61, Phase 2.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Woman Bovee.
I move to approve the consent agenda as read into the record by the clerk.
Any objection to those two items being passed? Mr. Yant, any objection?
No, sir.
Okay.
No, sir.
Pass those two, and then we'll take up 21-016, Madam Clerk.
A resolution approving the changes needed to update the fiscal year 2020 schedule of rates and fees effective July 1st, 2021. It was pulled by Assemblymember Sumner.
Go ahead, Mr. Sumner. Go ahead, move it, and then just start out the discussion.
I move to adopt Resolution 21-016, and I'd speak to it. In light of the $1.9 million surplus of revenue over expense in our CAFR here, I'm not sure that the increase in cost at the landfill for the tonnage charge at Central is appropriate for this upcoming fiscal year. Maybe staff could speak to this.
Ms. Dolan?
Terry Dolan, Director of Public Works. So we've talked about the landfill solid waste enterprise fund here a number of years in a row about the change in the amount of revenue and them being revenue neutral. And what I told you the last time the mayor asked me this directly was that the enterprise fund is revenue neutral on an operating basis, but it's not revenue neutral when you include the capital costs. So we have very large capital costs that we incur every few years that are multi-million-dollar costs. For example, opening a new landfill cell, about $5 to $7 million. Closing a cell, $3 to $5 million. And so the reason we have excess revenue in the enterprise fund right now is so that the next time that we have a large capital cost, we can pay for it rather than taking out a 20 or a 30-year loan to pay for it. So the difference is you're paying up front for the cost of the trash you dispose of rather than taking a loan out and paying for that bag of trash over 20 years. So that's why there appears to be extra funds in that account. In fact, we don't think we're revenue neutral even now when you include capital. We think we're about $10 a ton shy of that point. But we would never put a very large increase like that all in 1 year because there's plenty of residents who are on pensions or otherwise limited in what they can afford. And so as we try to reach a completely revenue neutral program, we do that in small increments. And so that's why you see these increases here, most of which are essentially just cost of living increases, right around the neighborhood of 2%. Did that answer your question?
Through the mayor. So I understand the sort of paying it forward for the capital outlay for opening new cells, but maybe I misunderstood this, but it is not the cost of closing cells and then the future liability of monitoring and whatnot part of that 600,000 expense each year? So
we're required by regulation to have that fund to care for the landfill essentially in perpetuity. That doesn't pay for me to close a landfill cell. Closing a landfill cell, like I said, 3 to 5 million or so. So you can see that amount of money that's in there isn't even close to closing the next cell. We're very close to finishing with cell 3 and starting cell 4. That'll happen this summer. So we'll incur a closure expense that $600,000 doesn't even come close to. I think you're probably familiar with the landfill gas management system that we installed this year. So it wasn't talked about in the CAFR because that was fiscal year 20 they were talking about. This is fiscal year 21 right now. We paid for the landfill gas management cell out of the enterprise fund balance rather than take a loan for it. So there's a good example of a short notice capital expense that's very large that fund balance allows us to pay for.
You okay?
Well, and then I'm just curious, does anybody know what the typical interest rate on those Clean Water, are they Clean Water Act loans for the
They
landfill?
are. It's federal money that's passed through the state. It's called Alaska Clean Water Fund loans. And there's loans both on the water treatment side and on the wastewater side. And the interest rates on them are typically we pay about 2%. I'm going to look at the finance director. She says, yes, that's correct.
Ms. Nowers?
Just a question on the construction and demolition debris charge for inside the Mat-Su Borough, which is $128. How does that compare to Anchorage, if you happen to know, just what the Anchorage landfill is charging?
Are you asking, do I know what the Anchorage landfill is charging? I do not know off the top of my head.
Okay. Do you know if we're setting to be on a par with what Anchorage charges for in municipality?
I believe we're above what Anchorage charges.
Okay. And then I had one more question, but on the port, it looks like there's a development application fee for charging now. That's brand new, $1,000. And I was just curious about the history on that. If somebody can answer that.
Which line
again?
is it?
Which item?
Oh, sorry.
You have a line item number on
Yeah.
that?
Page 8, line 136, port development, new application fee for $1,000.
Mr. Phillips is coming forward, so.
Yeah, the $1,000 is a permit that used to be processed in planning. It's been moved over to community development, and it's just based upon the actual cost of time and effort to process the port development permit.
Okay, so it's just a switch from one department to another as opposed to a brand new fee.
Correct.
Okay, anything else? Any other questions? Mr. Two?
I don't have a question for him. I just would like to talk about it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Phillips and Mr. Dolan. Go ahead, Mr. Two.
Stephanie asked about the landfill in Anchorage, about what they charge for C&D. And I don't know what the Anchorage C&D pit is, but I do know that the Alaska demo out here in Palmer is 120 a ton. So, and the reason I'd like to speak is because I'd like to see some of these fees go down on the tonnage to like 132 ton for the solid waste, which is line 536. And that would be a reduction of $7 a ton. And then the C&D, I'd like that's line 538. I'd like to see it at 121. And then the bags of garbage that people bring in their pickup, I'd like to see them charged like $2 a bag. And then like if they have that's line 534.
Okay, hang on a second. Madam Clerk wants you, so on 536, you're moving to amend line 536 from what to?
Yeah, to one, oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'd like to amend these from 142. They wanted to add, they wanted to add $3, so I would like to add that down to 132.
So line 536, you want to amend down to 132. Now line 538,
Line 538, I'd like to amend down to 121.
okay. And then the two bag is line
534
You want to go from what to what?
to $2 a bag. And that's, let me see. What they're charging currently is $3. They want to add $1, which would make it $4, but I would like to make that $2 a bag.
Okay.
And then flat fee, like if they have a pickup load, just make it a flat $10 for a pickup load, which is line 535.
535, you want to go from to?
They have it at 15. They want to increase it by 2, and I want to say reduce it to $10.
So line 535 reduced to $10 per
Yeah,
pick, per
that's a
pickup.
flat fee.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay,
And that's all I have on that.
Madam Clerk, should we do these one at a time, or how do you want
It's
to do?
up to the person who's making it, Mr. Mayor.
You want to do these one at a time, Mr. Two, or you want to do them all together?
Sure, I do them one at a time.
Okay, let's start with 536, going to 132. Discussion? Any objection to line 530, Mr. Sumner? Mr. Two, go ahead and tell, you're up.
Can we maybe have a minute, Mr. Mayor, so that we can calculate the rate, the impact of
Okay,
that change?
we'll take a little bit of a recess for 5 minutes. Is that enough? Well, we'll do 5 minutes and if we'll have a bathroom recess too. So we'll go off record at 8:04, 8:03 and come back on We're going back on record. The time is 8:10. We need Miss Nowers, the Borough Attorney. Mr. Two is coming. There we go. Chief Financial Officer is coming forward. That's good. Okay, we are on Resolution 21016. The first amendment by Mr. Two is line item 536. He wants to reduce that line item to 132. My understanding per ton. Okay, any objection to passing that line item reduction to 132? Okay, Ms. Nowers objects. So go ahead. You want to talk about it or I'm ready to vote.
I guess, I've heard from the Public Works Director in terms of considering the costs that come forward with these landfills, and that we're trying to take that into account. And this is just, I don't have any reason to just go. It seems I don't have any justification for putting it at 132. I do have a justification for hearing, that it's at 142 and that we have a staff that's analyzed this. So I don't think we're sitting there with landfill's gonna be super expensive. And if anything, I think we're under capitalized for what I know about C&D landfills. We're not lined out there. I think we got some issues with the old Smith ball fields. There's lots of places around the country. Anyways.
Well, does staff have, do you have somebody have an idea what this reduction does for the revenue?
Terry Dolan, Director of Public Works. This is a line 536, is that correct, Mr. Mayor? Yes. So it looks like the approximate loss here is about $519,000 in revenue, if that's the question.
But yeah, that is the question. Going down to the reduction to 132.
That's correct.
Okay. Everybody got that, Mr. Sumner?
Yeah. So I don't necessarily object to this. Actually kind of support it right now, but I'd like everyone to recognize that what we're doing is passing forward a liability, that somewhere down the road rates will increase even more, but it may be appropriate in this specific environment that we do give the public a little bit of a break on the fees. And I suppose we would be taking out more of the clean water loans, but the rates are, it sounds like, quite low. So, but if we do vote for this, just recognize we're just pushing forward a liability. So,
To the mayor, to the director of public works, what does the enterprise fund have in reserve right now?
Through the mayor to Assemblymember McKee, without having my audit right in front of me, there is a little over $10 million in fund balance. Of that $10 million, 4.3 million is the portion of fund balance that represents assets that the landfill holds, the solid waste holds. So that's the infrastructure, the cells, the buildings, whatnot. And then there's another 5 point whatever in basically undesignated fund balance that could be utilized for cells, cell closure, whatnot.
Thank you.
Okay.
This is Assemblyman Yunt. May I for a sec?
Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Yonton.
I wanted to kind of touch on what Stephanie brought up earlier about rates and the municipality of Anchorage. They are, I'm online studying here, looking at them. I always knew they were substantially less, but I just wanted to Google and make sure. And they're, I'm going to guess about 55 to 58% of what we charge. But in defense of, our budget, the municipality is a tiny, tiny little area compared to ours. And it's, that systems and their, their hauling and everything has to be so much more efficient than ours. I mean, we're bringing in refuse from areas way further away than they are in our transfer stations and whatnot. I kind of, as Mr. Sumner had said earlier, do I think that we could make some changes, some really positive changes going forward that we can all talk about in the future? Absolutely, I do. But, right now, if we reduce any of these, there is going to be a cost later, which is a little bit concerning to me. But, we could look at the Kenai Peninsula Borough too, where refuse is free. You don't pay a cent, but we all know that nothing in this world is free, right? So that's just making your property taxes or your sales taxes substantially higher, and so it evens out in the end. Like I said, I'm not necessarily against this. I'm not necessarily for it. I do know if we don't have the money now, we'll need it later, and that's a little bit concerning to me. So anyway, I just wanted to add those notes, that the stuff that I've been looking at here. So
Thank you. Mr. Hale?
Yeah, I guess I'm a little confused. Obviously, we all would like to see lower dump fees, but I think Assemblymember Summerman makes an excellent point that, we're just going to pay for this later somehow, some way, one way or the other, either through these 2% loans or as Mr. Yunt said, maybe property tax increases to subsidize the solid waste. I just don't agree with that at all. And I'm just a little concerned about, what the end result of this is going to be 5-10 years down the road. So.
Okay, Mr. Sumner.
Through the mayor to Mr. Dolan. I just had a question. Could you go over when you, again, I think maybe you mentioned it already, but when do you project next cell closing and having to open a new one?
Terry Dolan, Director of Public Works. We expect cell 3 to be full by this summer and cell 4 to begin operation. We constructed cell 4 last year. So cell 3 will be ready to close. We probably won't close it right away, but within a few years, we certainly will. And the reason why we will is because rainwater and snow melt filters through that cell and creates leachate, which is an industrial waste that's very expensive for us to dispose of. And the sooner we close that cell, the sooner we stop creating leachate inside of it. At least we don't create as much, because when you close it, you put a impermeable barrier over the top of it so that rainwater and snowmelt can't get in the cell. So you'll see us close that in a few years. I can't tell you the exact date, but it'll be in a couple of years. We'll have to pay that price.
So would this $500,000 impact that schedule, or would this be more down the road?
It certainly wouldn't change the schedule. What it would change potentially would be the amount of money that we would have to borrow to close that cell. And of course, that cell being full means it doesn't generate revenue anymore. There's no more waste being put into it. And so we're going to borrow $3 to $5 million to close it without it generating any revenue. All that revenue will have to come from future receipts of waste.
This is Assemblyman Yunt. May I ask Mr. Dolan a question, please?
Yes, go ahead.
Is it possible, I know during recess, we were seeing what each line item would change in revenue. Is it possible to get a total number of all of that right now? That was one question. And then I did want to comment that even though at 2% interest rates, I'm nervous about borrowing any money in the future. Anyway, enough of that. I'm not a big fan of borrowing money, I guess you could say. So can we get a total of what all the line items would be? I think that would help for everybody.
So it's 536, 538, 534, and 535.
So I would estimate in the neighborhood of a loss of about $1 million in revenue with these changes.
Okay, and then final question would be, with cell 3 closing later this year, and cell 4 opening, how many years, and I know you can't answer this exactly, sir, but just how long, estimated guess on how long a cell will last? How long will cell 4 last?
We typically design the cells to last right around 5 years. We made cell 4 a little larger, but it, to a large degree, depends on the speed of growth that we're seeing here in the valley, because the production of waste is really a function of economic activity. And we estimate between 5 and 7 years before we'll have to close that cell. In the meantime, we'll have to build cell 5, and we'll have to close cell number 3.
Assemblywoman Nowers.
Just had a question about, we had issue with methane that we didn't expect at the landfill. What was the estimated cost so far on dealing with that, and where did that funding come from? And was it budgeted for previously?
I'm referring to my phone here because I've got the division manager, the solid waste division manager texting me. Cost, you're asking for the cost on the gas management system? You'll have to give me a moment because there's a lag. $2.4 million.
And where did that funding come from, and was it previously budgeted?
It came from fund balance in the enterprise fund. So we didn't actually go out and borrow money. This is the first major capital undertaking that we've had where we actually were able to pay for it with fund balance.
Okay. Any further questions for Mr. Dolan? Thank you, sir, for answering those questions so accurately and quickly. Okay. Let's take a look at 536 first. That's the first amendment to reduce that line item 536 to 132 per ton. Is there any objection to that amendment passing? Okay, there is objection by Ms. Bovee, so go ahead and, Madam Clerk, vote for it.
Assemblymember Yant,
No.
Mr. Mayor, it failed with Assemblymember Sumner, 2, and McKee in support.
Okay, let's go to line item 538. Mr. Two's reduction in 538 is to 121. Any objection to that amendment? There is objection, so go ahead and vote, please.
Assemblymember Yant,
No.
Mr. Mayor, it failed with Assemblymember Sumner, 2, and McKee in support.
Okay, let's go to line item 534. The reduction is to $2 per bag. Any objection to passing that amendment? There is objection, so go ahead and vote, please.
Assemblymember Yant,
Yes.
Mr. Mayor, it passed with Assemblymember Sumner, Assemblymember Nowers, and Assemblymember Bovee opposed.
Okay. So 534 is passed. Let's go to line item 535. Reduction is from $15 to $10 per pickup, correct? Okay. $10 would be the final number. Any objection to that passing? There is objection, so go ahead and vote.
Assemblymember Yant,
No.
Mr. Mayor, it passed with Assemblymember Yunt, Nowers, and Bovee opposed.
Okay, so line item 535 has passed. Okay, any other changes, amendments? Any objection to resolution 21016 as amended, which is line item 534 and 535 passed. Any objection to this? Mr. Sumner?
Mr. Mayor, are we taking a vote on the,
Resolution as amended.
resolution as amended? Actually, I did want to ask staff about the impact of some of these other fee changes, if that's possible.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah.
Who do you want, Mr. Dolan or?
Yeah, Mr. Dolan.
Mr. Dolan, could you come
So,
back?
I do see here on the transfer stations, a number of the fees are deleted, but then it looks like 1 per cubic yard rate stays. So are you only charging one rate for everybody that comes, basically, no matter how much waste or?
It's up to 5 cubic yards, but it's the same per cubic yard. Whatever you paid for the first cubic yard is the same as you pay for the second cubic yard.
And what do you think the total, so I guess, what is the revenue impact of that?
Pardon me?
Does that decrease total revenue or increase total revenue? Because I guess I'm confused because you're striking a lot of revenue lines here, but then you've got a large increase in 1 per cubic yard. So in net, would that be an increase or a decrease in revenue from the previous year's fee structure?
I'm trying to find the correct line so I can see the occurrences.
Line 558 through 563. So it looks like you're changing the way you charge the transfer station fees.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the number of occurrences here and just doing the quick math on the total change. And essentially, this just makes it a linear, rate so that every yard it costs the same as every other yard. Overall, I can't tell you 100% how it's going to change the revenue here. Anytime that you create a sweet spot in the rates, you encourage residents to sort of flock to that rate. So, for example, if you made 1 yard cheaper than 2 yards, say 1 yard was $10 and 2 yards was $25, you would encourage residents to come more often because the rate is better at 1 yard than it is at 2. And so all this does is it changes the structure so that it's completely linear, so that you can bring up to 5 yards to us and each yard costs the same as every other yard. That's all this does.
I think I misunderstood. So you are still, if they bring 5 yards, they're being charged for 5 yards?
That's correct.
It's not just a
That's right.
1 yard charge for
And it's
every
5
trip?
times the
Oh.
1 yard rate instead of being an odd rate that's different.
You okay with that? Okay. Anything else, Mr. Dolan? Thank you, Mr. Dolan. Okay, anything else on Resolution 21016? It was amended twice. Any objection to pass it as amended? Mr. Yant, any objection to pass in 21016?
No, sir.
Okay, 21016.
No, sir.
Passes with 2 amendments on line 535 and line 534 were passed. Okay, let's go to AM 21019 and the conflicts for Mr. Sumner and Mr. Tu that applied, and Resolution 21014 will apply here, I'm assuming. So if you guys gentlemen wanted to step out real quick. I don't know who pulled this, Madam Clerk.
It was Assembly Member 2 due to his conflict of
Okay,
interest.
so I think the only issue was the conflicts. Any objection to pass in
I
21?
got to read it into the record,
Okay,
Mr. Mayor.
Madam Clerk, I knew that.
Authorizing the manager to enter into a memorandum of agreement with Valley Transit for the centralized mobility management software project.
Ms. Bovee,
I move to approve AM 21-019.
any objection? Okay, AM 21019.
No.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Yant. 21019 passes. So we could tell the two gentlemen to come back in, please, Mr. Spraplus. There's no unfinished business. There's no vetoes, no introductions. There's no introductions, Madam Clerk. You're slipping.
Yay.
No vacancy report. There's no other new business. There are no referrals. There are no reconsiderations. There are no comments. There's no executive session. Okay. We'll go to comments. Mr. Spraplus, any final comments?
You said no comments, so no comment.
Okay. Mr. Brown?
No comments.
Madam Clerk? Mr. Sumner? Ms. Nowers? Uh-oh, a red light went on.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First, I'm very disappointed in our MTA person, Mr. Graham, for enlightening me that we actually have a state with more than one area code. I've always been proud to be 907, so I'm very disappointed on two fronts to hear that there actually is a separate area code and that I'm going to have to dial 9 numbers because I've always loved being in a state that just had one. So disappointed about that, but I'm very grateful to have our member type cooperatives like MEA and MTA that support our community. I sure hope that Houston Middle School moves forward in March. Those kids have been without a school for a long time. So whatever we can do to do that. Our 50% road bond match, I just like to see, it doesn't make any sense to me that the governor is proposing a GO bond that would give us funding for a road and not have funding for the matches for the roads that we're talking about. So I'd really like to see, just reiterate that we get that matching funding come forward for road projects that we've already set aside. Other thing I just kind of noticed in that CIP list is the number of communities that are asking for pedestrian, bike paths, sidewalks. And it just makes me think of, that's something as a borough we can provide as a community. It seems like we back end that. Great example is that Mockinton School down there, they're still trying to get a bike path to go all the way to the school. And it just seems like that should be part of the discussion up front. So just kind of stood out to me to see the number of communities that were trying to put those in. I think people realize and appreciate the value of those. And then, lastly on amendments, I know it's not always possible, but if it's possible to get those to us, beforehand in any sort of way, that's really helpful for me it's challenging, especially when we're talking about impacting the budget. And a particular department to analyze it on the fly like that. Maybe some people are better than others at doing that. So just as much, and I know it's not always possible, but just a request on that end. So thank you.
Okay, Mr. McKee, comments?
One thing, the manager during his comments addressed the funding for Houston Elementary going to be high school or whatever, okay? And previously, last week, I got a memorandum. We all got the same memorandum relative to the CARES and fund balance for the school district. Now, the school district got, since 1 July, and I'm going to deal in round numbers, they have received $15 million for operational costs, which means that they have $15 million to spare in their current contract, okay? Now, if you take the $15 million that we got from the insurance and the $15 million that the school district got from CARES, that is $30 million. Their fund balance was $23 million. If you take $3 million off the 23, okay, that's still going to allow them to go over and get a drink or what have you. And but that would pay for the school and you could build it anytime. Now, I would end it with this. I want someone to correct me if I've got the wrong impression. My understanding is the school district is not a for-profit business, that it is a part of the borough. And they need a fund balance of $23 million and a total of $38 million in unrestricted they have right now, like Custer needed more Indians, okay? They could, in fact, fund the Houston school. And I think we ought to address that to them.
Well, Mr. Manager just sent a letter to Dr. Trainee, and I'll have a letter going out to this school board president, so on that issue. Mr. Tu, comments?
The landfill about 10 years ago was collecting up around $3 million. 10 years fast forward today, they're collecting up over $9 million. So I just think that the landfill can tighten up its belt a little bit and help out the citizens and reduce the rate of what they pay to get rid of their garbage. So that's what I tried to do tonight. I'll continue to try to do it. We just authorized the contract for them to haul leachate from here to Anchorage. Leachate costs 0.02 cents a gallon, 0.027 cents a gallon. That contract, I believe, was for $400,000. They could probably save $300,000 hauling it themselves. They have the equipment there in the yard. There's ways to be efficient. But if you're not forced to be efficient or asked to be efficient, why would you? That's what I got to say.
Mr. Hale?
No comment, Mr. Mayor.
Ms. Bovee?
Yeah, I'd just like to thank Assemblymember Sumner for leaving the Meadow Lake Senior Housing Project on the CIP list. Thank you.
Mr. Yacht, I missed you. Go ahead, please.
No comment.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, Mr. Tu, I was actually kind of pleased that the $2 bag was passed and the pickup rate was reduced. I like that. I think the other two was a good vote considering the revenue that the borough might need in that enterprise fund. So Ms. Sullivan, I sure hope you write a letter to BDO inviting them to join us at Arctic Winter Games and thank them for their great CAFR report. And I don't know what we pay them, but maybe that's what we'd ask for sponsorship. But anyway, we'll just say good evening and adjourn at approximately, what do you think, Matt? 8:38 adjournment.